Hello and welcome back to the channel. As always, I'm your host, Morgan. This week we're going to be talking a little bit about a bill that was just signed into law on August 4th, 2020, the Great American Outdoors Act. The main idea and big picture of this bill is that it provides a max of $1.9 billion per year for 5 years for the national parks and other public lands that are connected to the National Forest System, BLM, all those fun things, starting in 2021. This money is specifically for improvements and the addressing of the maintenance backlog that has been piling up as visitation to these lands has been increasing in the recent decades. And the current funding that these parks have had just has not been enough to keep up with what needs to be done to keep these maintenance things going so that our facilities and our wilderness can remain intact and be able to be used by the general public. Besides this 5-year plan, the bill also has an assurance for $900 million a year for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is the fund that helps these particular organizations and associations run our public lands. The problem with the money being provided is that it is tied to oil and gas drilling on federal lands. And this is where I have the issue. While it is wonderful that our parks are getting the funding that they so desperately need, it is a little concerning that the money is tied to the fossil fuel industry, which has interest in drilling on these public lands and in a way makes the argument for a switch to green energy a little more difficult. So let's talk a little bit about these problems and some of the thoughts that I've been having, especially about the irony of President Trump actually signing this bill. Now, before we can talk a little bit about the irony itself, let's take a look back at everything that he's kind of done in regards to our public lands and our American environmental protection laws and acts that have been in place for many years. So almost immediately, he slashed the size of the Bears Ears National Monument in Utah by 85%. This monument had just been established right before that during the Obama administration. And it was a big success and triumph to even get that national monument put into place. So it was kind of a slap in the face to the national parks, national monuments, environmentalists, all of that, to have that reduced. No president before him has ever attacked a national monument or national park like that by reducing its size. So personally, at least, I know I was alarmed by this because that is setting precedent for future years and future things that are similar to this to happen. Also, he has allowed for the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and a large portion of our United States coastline to open up to oil and natural gas drilling. This is concerning because oil and natural gas is the backbone of this fossil fuel industry that much of the world is attempting to move away from, as fossil fuels are finite and are going to run out. And the drilling of them and spills of them destroy ecosystems. Very regularly, they destroy ecosystems. There's already enough problems with drilling in a terrestrial environment where it's a bit more easy, but that's not even the right word, to clean up a spill. In a marine environment, it's nearly impossible, but we're not talking about oil spills and cleaning that up. It's just, this was another attack on these things that environmentalists like myself have been fighting against for so long. And I am firmly a person that believes that we need to move away from the fossil fuels and invest into green and renewable energy technologies. This Trump administration has also reduced protections for wetlands, weakened the Endangered Species Act, removed protections for sage grouse habitat in the western states, and put a person in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency who has admitted to having goals to dismantle the agency and many lawsuits against the agency in the past, and has been very tied to the fossil fuel industry. Now, that whole mess is another story in and of itself, and leadership of the EPA has changed throughout this presidency, so I don't want to dwell on this one, but that was kind of a big middle finger to everyone that fights for these protections for the environment. And currently, the Trump administration is pushing to open up the Grand Canyon area for uranium mining for nuclear energy to expand in the United States. Now, that's a whole nother discussion, and I'm not really interested in getting into the nuances of nuclear and those implications here. My issue is specifically the opening up of the Grand Canyon area to that uranium mining that would then poison waterways and open up this pollution to these springs and other water sources for these native peoples that still depend on these springs and what have you for water. And also it would destroy a sensitive ecosystem, potentially. And I just don't see how even the thought of that is acceptable. But there has been some articles floating around saying that the Trump administration also has allegedly inquired into adding another president to Mount Rushmore, which has been shot down and said that there's no room. And frankly, Mount Rushmore in and of itself, if you look into the history of it, is a travesty. And I understand that that's not a very popular opinion to hold, but Mount Rushmore in and of itself is an ecological disaster and a big middle finger to Native American culture. Again, that's not something that we're going to dwell on in this video. And the administration, the last point here, supports the privatization of certain services in national parks, which on its surface doesn't necessarily look like a bad thing, but it could very easily be. And I haven't necessarily read enough into the implications of that to very thoroughly be able to discuss it. But on the surface, privatization of certain services means that prices may shoot up, and that can limit the people that can reasonably afford to visit our nation's public wildernesses. So it is a little ironic that Trump signed this act that is one of the best bills to have passed through up to his desk or any president's desk for a while in regards to funding for our national parks and other wilderness protecting agencies, because he's been so systematically trying to dismantle this whole thing. But again, the funding is tied to fossil fuels. I've seen some sources saying that it would be tied to any green energy as well, but in the wording of the bill, I can't really see where it says that. All I see is from drilling on federal lands. So that in and of itself is concerning, because that holds the implications of anyone pushing for the end of fossil fuel drilling to then be associated with pushing for the end of proper funding for the national parks and these environmental protection agencies. And that is problematic, since green energy is the future no matter what you personally feel about it. Fossil fuels are eventually going to run out. They are a finite source of energy. Renewables are the future. And frankly, why are we not using them more probably can be answered by where is the funding and that answer. Unfortunately, these green projects are not being funded properly because the fossil fuel industries are the industries that kind of control these lobbying political machines. But I don't necessarily want to get into that discussion because I know this video is already getting a little long. I'm just skeptical that the actual signature on the bill is more than a grab for good publicity, since we are heading into an election in a few months here. And frankly, the Trump administration is facing very negative press surrounding the response to the pandemic that is currently ongoing. Maybe I'm jaded, but I fail to see any objectively good intentions in this man or his administration. Yes, the bill in itself is a good thing, but funding needs to be more secured and not tied to fossil fuels. Because if the funding is tied to fossil fuels and fossil fuels run out and we do shift to green energy, where does the funding go? Like, what happens? Does it dry up? I guess we'll see. But another little note that I thought was a little ironic was specifically the White House article saying that Trump made promises to restore, conserve, and protect America's lands, which actions kind of speak louder than words. I personally don't remember him ever making that promise, and his actions throughout his presidency so far are contradictory to that statement. But I have linked a bunch of references down below for y'all to go look at, and I do genuinely hope you do. So yes, I'm glad this funding now exists. However, the funding needs to be better in the future, and this really does need to be addressed. So yes, celebrate little victories, but let's perhaps try to get better funding later. I will see you all in the next one. Thank you again for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell if you would like to see more. And if you'd like to follow me on any of my other social medias, the links are down in the description below. Don't forget to check out thereptilegoth.com for all of my articles and blog posts. If you found any value in this video and you would like to help support the channel, please check out my Patreon page. That link is also in the description down below. And a special thanks goes out to my Diamond Dragon patron, Diane B. What you're doing is really helping me fund a dream here. I will see you guys all in the next one.